Шановні друзі, у нас, як завжди, ранковий брифінг. Північно-західніше Києва противник.
Dear friends, we have as always a morning briefing. To the northwest of Kyiv, the enemy continues to concentrate its efforts and groups in order to develop an offensive on Kyiv. However, the enemy doesn't succeed thanks to the systematic and skillful work of the armed force of Ukraine. Yesterday, the armed force of Ukraine launched air and artillery strikes, which slowed down the offensive operation of the Russian Federation. Now the enemy is recovering from losses and is not moving anywhere. In the Chernihiv and Sumy directions, the enemy's offensive has been stopped, and our guerrillas and military are killing off enemy forces. The armed forces and the defense forces have begun a real hunt for enemy columns, which is what we really need to do, and I want to urge everyone to do it. In Kharkiv, the enemy is bombarding the city with multiple rocket launchers and aircrafts. As I understand it, the enemy has a task to break down psychologically Kharkiv and to commit terror. But the armed forces of Ukraine, the territorial defense, and the other defenders of the city are very skillful and attacking the enemy. Kharkiv today is the Stalingrad of the 21st century, as the whole Ukraine is. The enemy suffers unheard terrible losses in Kharkiv. Yesterday, several enemy planes were shot down over Kharkiv. The data is being clarified. In the Joint Forces Operation Zone, there are good news. Most of our forces hold their positions, and one separate brigade has even advanced on the outskirts of Horlivka and is now consolidating there to develop the offensive. This is very good news because for the first time on the 7th day of war, our units moved on the offense in a separate direction. I think this is not the last offensive and not the last counterattack. The time will soon come when we will liberate our lands, not just protect it. The Mariupol direction. The situation there is relatively calm, but enemy attempts to attack the suburbs are possible. Our military and territorial defense forces are monitoring the situation and will give a tough answer. Kherson. Street fighting continues there. Despite numerous attempts at the informational struggle by the enemy and reports that Kherson has fallen, this is not true. Our military and defense forces continue to resist in and out the city. The enemy made an attempt in advance towards Mykolaiv yesterday, but their forces were exposed to devastating air blow and suffered big losses in manpower, equipment and stocks. Now, according to the Mykolaiv regional administration, the Russian airborne is being systematically destroyed right now after it had landed near the city. A huge convoy of the enemy has been destroyed today near Kryvyi Rih. As for the issue that worries everyone, Energodar and Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the enemy has been stopped at the entrance to the city. The city authorities and the population entered into negotiations and explained the danger of nuclear catastrophe if there were fights in the area of the nuclear power plant. I think this is a signal that the Ukrainian leadership should also convey with the foreign partners, and I think it will do very soon. They have to inform about the danger of war or the presence of Russian troops itself on the territory of Ukraine and nuclear facilities. Zaporizhzhia is ready to defend itself as well as Kryvyi Rih. I think our military shall prevail. There was a certain psychological change on the battlefield. That is, everyone knows watching the internet that the enemy massively throws its weapon and equipment, surrenders or moves towards the Russian or Belarusian border. The only forces that are still actively resisting are those organized masses of the enemy led by the Russian generals and the top leadership. The ones that haven't yet come under the devastating fire of our artillery, aircraft and ground forces. But there are fewer and fewer of them. I think that Russian soldiers will soon refuse to carry out their tasks. According to the official reports, the Russians are throwing into battle even cadets of military schools. In particular, such information comes from the Pukhov military school, where second-year cadets were thrown into the war against Ukraine. That means that the entire mighty Russian army can no longer cope with Ukraine and people and the armed forces. And that means disaster in general and in terms of the military rule, because cadets of military schools usually are not mobilized and not involved in hostilities until the last moment. Attempts to involve the Belarusian army should also be mentioned, but so far there are no official data that the Belarusian army is taking part in the war against Ukraine. The level of signals we receive is insufficient to say that the Belarusians have already entered the war. We crushed the enemy. Our aviation and artillery is still working, and they are working very skillfully. Yesterday was the day of airstrikes both near Kyiv, Mykolaiv and other cities. Our troops in Kharkiv even counterattacked and defeated the 200th Brigade of the enemy in the battle. This was one of the best and elite units of the Russian army. Therefore, our soldiers win. And when soldiers win in direct clashes on the battlefield, it shows their professionalism and very uplifting fighting spirit. In general, we have this Cossack spirit that the Russians woke up against themselves here. The enemy will be defeated. Victory will be ours. Follow our signals. I would like to speak separately about the airstrikes that hit Ukraine. The enemy almost doesn't use the caliber missiles, because they are simply over. Now there are few supplies of these weapons in Russia. Therefore, the enemy began to strike with the Iskander missiles. These complexes have their disadvantages and advantages. There are more disadvantages, to be honest. They have serious deviation, which on one hand increases the danger to civilian objects and, on the other hand, prevents the enemy from inflicting serious damage on us. They conduct airstrikes at night because they are afraid of our aircrafts and air defense. The night slightly covers their actions. The Iskander missiles and airstrikes were carried out in Kyiv, Zhytomyr and Kharkiv. The strength and consequences of these strikes are being investigated. The president will announce the losses to himself. It is his prerogative. But we all know that there was a barbaric bombing of the Kyiv TV tower. This was done as part of the information campaign they waged against us. The enemy fired a rocket at the Jewish cemetery in the Babin Yar memorial complex, which provoked a negative reaction from the international Jewish community. We can say with confidence that this was one of main mistakes of the Russian Federation in this war. I think that Russia revised stopping that senseless adventure, because such cases will increase in number and the reaction of the international world community will worsen for the Russian every day. Wait for the next briefing, have a nice day, and remember, the worse the situation, the more you need to smile and help each other. We must believe in our victory.